Đêm buồn lặng lẽ một mình tôi, nhìn mưa rơi chợt thấy bồi hồi, thao thức đợi chờ người xưa đến. Có lẽ người ta chẳng đến rồi, ngậm ngùi nhìn cánh phượng vĩ rơi, ve ngân dạ khúc thất bùi ngùi. Hà chưa kịp đi thu vội tới, từ nay ta đã mất nhau rồi, duyên nợ hai ta đã hết rồi. Yeah. Đêm buồn lặng lẽ một mình tôi, nhìn mưa rơi chợt thấy bồi hồi, thao thức đợi chờ người xưa đến. Có lẽ người ta chẳng đến rồi, ngậm ngùi nhìn cánh phượng vĩ rơi, ve ngân dạ khúc thất bùi ngùi. Hà chưa kịp đi thu vội tới, từ nay ta đã mất nhau rồi, duyên nợ hai ta đã hết rồi. Yeah. Đêm buồn lặng lẽ một mình tôi, nhìn mưa rơi chợt thấy bồi hồi, thao thức đợi chờ người xưa đến. Có lẽ người ta chẳng đến rồi, ngậm ngùi nhìn cánh phượng vĩ rơi, ve ngân dạ khúc thất bùi ngùi. Hà chưa kịp đi thu vội tới, từ nay ta đã mất nhau rồi, duyên nợ hai ta đã hết rồi. Yeah. Phải đâu ta muôn độc thân, phong sương áo bạc tình nên chẳng gian. Cuộc đời sao lắm phong ba, chữ duyên lần đận ép nửa đời tình yêu, nghe mãi xa xôi. Khi đi lúc đến như chơi trốn tìm, thôi đành mặc kệ con tim, để cho số phận tự tìm lấy nhau. Mình chẳng thích đi theo xu thế, nhưng tại sao vẫn để đến nay? Chắc là mình đẹp thế này, mọi người cứ nghĩ mình đây có bồ. Tôi mặc kệ đời số mình đây, sống ép ấy mình cũng thấy cũng vui. Có khỏi cần nếm phai những mùi ghen hơn cay đắng. Khi đi lúc đến như chơi trốn tìm, thôi đành mặc kệ con tim, để cho số phận tự tìm lấy nhau. Mình chẳng thích đi theo xu thế, nhưng tại sao vẫn đến đến này? Chắc là mình đẹp thế này, mọi người cứ nghĩ mình đây có bồ. Thôi mặc kệ đời số mình đây, sống ép ấy mình cũng thấy cũng vui, khỏi cần nếm phai những mùi ghen hơn cay đắng. Em xinh như một bông hoa ngát hương lan tỏa thiết tha tháng ngày. Dù xa tình anh vẫn đắm say, như bên nhau mãi vòng tay nồng nàn. Hoa em dù úa hay tàn, nụ hôn anh gửi trên làn môi xinh. Yêu em mãi mãi chung tình, hương hoa vẫn quyện đôi mình với nhau. Đừng làm cho trái tim đau, đừng làm nỗi nhớ nát nhau tâm can. Tình yêu không đợi thời gian, yêu nhau có lúc lệ tràn đậm mi, đừng bao giờ nói chia ly. Em xinh như một bông hoa ngát hương lan tỏa thiết tha tháng ngày. Dù xa tình anh vẫn đắm say, như bên nhau mãi vòng tay nồng nàn. Hoa em dù úa hay tàn, nụ hôn anh gửi trên làn môi xinh. Yêu em mãi mãi chung tình, hương hoa vẫn quyện đôi mình với nhau. Đừng làm cho trái tim đau, đừng làm nỗi nhớ nát nhau tâm can. Tình yêu không đợi thời gian, yêu nhau có lúc lệ tràn đậm mi, đừng bao giờ nói chia ly. Em xinh như một bông hoa ngát hương lan tỏa thiết tha tháng ngày. Dù xa tình anh vẫn đắm say, như bên nhau mãi vòng tay nồng nàn. Hoa em dù úa hay tàn, nụ hôn anh gửi trên làn môi xinh. Yêu em mãi mãi chung tình, hương hoa vẫn quyện đôi mình với nhau. Đừng làm cho trái tim đau, đừng làm nỗi nhớ nát nhau tâm can. Tình yêu không đợi thời gian, yêu nhau có lúc lệ tràn đậm mi, đừng bao giờ nói chia ly.
In the first session last night, I was making two principal points about the nature of Buddhism. Number one, that it's a dharma or method, and its method is a dialogue, or what is sometimes called dialectic. It is basically a conversation, a dialogue, the beginning of which is not necessarily at all the same thing as the end. The reason is that the discovery which constitutes the foundation of Buddhism, the experience of awakening, can't be stated. Or at least, if it can be stated, it can't be stated in such a way that the mere statement will communicate the experience to somebody else. The experience itself is the culmination of an adventure, and one has to go through that adventure in order to come to it. I've sometimes tried to describe this adventure as a reductio ad absurdum of one's own false views, through a process wherein the teacher makes you act consistently upon your false views, so that you come to find out experimentally that they are false. And indeed, one might say, Buddhism has nothing to teach, nothing whatever. All it has to do is to get rid of illusions. And then the content, the experience happens when the illusions are gone, just like the sun comes out when the clouds go away. But if you try to manufacture the sun before the clouds have gone away, you see what I mean? And you paint the sun on this side of the clouds, it's not the real sun. So in this way, the speculation as such, ideation as such, does not lead to the awakening experience. So then this was the first point then, that it's a dialogue, and from the statements about Buddhism that you can read in books, you will discover only the opening phases of the dialogue. One of the methods that's used in this respect, people say, now, Buddhism teaches that all things are subject to change. Nothing is permanent. Now, that isn't exactly what Buddhism teaches. A more subtle scholar will tell you that the Buddha taught that the world is impermanent in order to counteract the wrong view that it's permanent. And Buddhist teachers always work in oppositions. If a person asks you a question about philosophical matters, you should reply in terms of everyday matters. What is the fundamental principle of Buddhism? I have just finished washing the saucepans. Or the other way round, if a person asks you a worldly question, you answer with a philosophical one. Please will you pass me the knife? And so the teacher passes it blade first. Please, I want the other end. What would you do with the other end? You see? Here the metaphysics comes in answer to the practical question. And so if once when R.H. Blythe, who's a great Zen student, was asked by some students, do you believe in God? He replied, if you do, I don't. If you don't, I do. So, when anything then is taught, it's taught in order to counteract something. You see, the Buddha taught that there was no self. And scholars have debated eternally whether he meant there was no ego in the sense of the superficial I centered on consciousness alone, or whether he taught that there is no self in the more classical Hindu sense of the Atman, that is to say, the ultimate self, the divine final reality which is in everybody. which is the root and ground of all consciousness everywhere. And some people, you see, have thought that he denied that. Well, he may very well have done so. But with the idea, you see, of correcting something. If you see a person believes that his basic self is divine and eternal and beyond all vicissitude, he may be believing that for very wrong reasons. He may be believing in it as something to cling to give him a sense of security. But so long as you have a sense of security and you feel safe, you haven't got the point. Because it means you're still relying on something. And a Buddha is a man who doesn't depend on anything. Not because he's so tough and he's so strong. When you get a tough guy who says, I'm not afraid of anything, you try him out and you'll soon find he has limits. Everybody has his price, if you try hard enough. It isn't, you see, a question of being strong in the sense of tough. It's a question of knowing very clearly that there isn't anything to depend on. So you don't depend on things anymore. The only thing to depend on is what you really are. But that's not something you can hang on to, you see. You can't catch hold of that, you don't need to. The sun doesn't need to shine a light on the sun. So, by the exploration of the dialectic, the teacher, by talking this way and talking that way, completely undermines you. That is to say, he digs out all the dirt from underneath you. And you drop, or think you do, because you're used to having the earth there. But when you're fully in empty space, there's nowhere to drop. That's why people get such a marvelous feeling when they go skin diving and they get down below 30 feet or so and start to lose all sense of weight. Or when astronauts go out and start to lose weight in the middle of their space bubbles. You know what's going to happen? All those boys are going to get out there and they're not going to want to come back. This is just great. That's what happens to skin divers, you see. They didn't have automatic controls on those things. They'd be not too certain of getting the man back. Because when people go down skin diving and they stay down too long, so you have to have a watch with you, or someone with a string on you, or something, to know exactly when you've got to make the trip back. You may have oxygen to last you a long time, but you're going to go out of your mind, because you will suddenly realize that nothing matters, that everything is okay. I mean, so what? Supposing I do die. And people take off their oxygen masks and present it to a fish. Say, have a drag. They're so happy, you see. So you know the famous story when Suzuki was asked, what is it like to have Satori? He said, well, it's just like ordinary everyday experience, except about 2 inches off the ground. So there is this peculiar thing, a sense of, you might say, weightlessness. But you mustn't interpret that too literally. Some people interpret it so literally that they believe great mystics levitate. I remember when I was a little boy, there was a famous dean in England. His name was Ralph W. Inge, or Ing, I think it's pronounced. And he wrote many books on Plotinus and mysticism. And one day he came to Canterbury Cathedral and was sitting in the choir stall, and I was sitting right near him. And I noticed that all the time he was doing this. He had a stick, you know, but people said it was because he was always about to levitate. Had to keep himself pressed down. So that levitation, you see, just is something in mystical experience, like a sense of luminosity or a sense of transparency. It's very common. There are two visions of the world, you see, that painters have had in history. There's the vision of, let's say, in our own Western history, the vision of Giotto or Fra Angelico, and the vision of Rembrandt. You see, Rembrandt is full of shadows, whereas the other painters are full of luminosity. And then you can get some painters who are not only full of shadows, but their paintings look as if they were all drawn just outside a Foster's frieze. You know what a Foster's frieze is? I don't know if you have them on the East Coast, but you probably have the equivalent. They're places where they sell ice cream custard. And they sell them from a glass box, which is all lit inside with fluorescent light. It's absolutely blue and cold. And the customers all stand outside the glass box. And on a chilly night, yeah, there you see them, all under this ghastly blue light, eating ice cream cones. And the men serve it to them through little windows, like a theater ticket box. And how people can go, that's my idea of one of the cold hells. But they do, and so there are some paintings, some visions of the world that look as if they're seen under that light, so that there is no light within things. Now, when you see the other painter, he sees light in everything. Even shadows are full of color. You notice with Picasso's work how full of light it is. And that's because the vision of the world, of the mystic, is always full of light. Only it isn't quite literal light. It isn't as if everything was blazing. Or he may say that everything is transparent. And it doesn't mean that he can see through your body to the wall or the other person behind. It means that things are transparent because they're clear. It has become clear. A problem has disappeared that I thought was a real problem, and now it is clear. I can't tell you how it's clear, but it is. And that's what we're going to get to in finding out what thusness is. When things are seen in the state of thusness or suchness, they are clear. There is no further problem about them. They are what they are, and they do what they do. And if you can really penetrate that, as we shall go into it, you will see the mystery clear up. The mystery clears up when you get to the point that you don't know what questions to ask anymore. The questions have vanished. The problem has vanished. Now, aside from the fact that Buddhism is a method, is a dialogue, I explained too that it's a transformation of one's state of consciousness. That's what awakening means. That is to say, it is a transformation of the way you see things. Almost, I could say, the way you sense them. And in this respect, I've often thought that the process of Buddhism is much more like ophthalmology than it's like religion. An ophthalmologist is a person who corrects your vision so that you see clearly. And so in exactly the same way, awakening is to see clearly. A transformation of consciousness. Be careful of the implications that that word may have, because it doesn't mean necessarily an ecstatic state of affairs, and it doesn't mean an unnatural or even strange state of affairs. I mean, you could imagine that if you put on blue glasses, you would for a while see everything looking blue. It isn't something like that at all. Or it isn't as if you saw everything in a different way, like you suddenly put on the eyes of a fly, you see, and suddenly everything became multiple. You saw this room and the people in it hundreds of times all at once. It isn't something like that. It's just that everything is the way it always was, except it has a completely different meaning. And there is a curious connection between the experience of this and the understanding of it. First of all, there are really three steps in this kind of understanding. You might say there is, in the first place, an intellectual comprehension, or the getting of an idea. Now, what sort of idea do I mean? Let's take, for example, the idea of a third dimension. To be aware of depth. If you look at things with one eye only, you see, you don't see depth. But if you look with two eyes, then the dimension of depth appears. And once you, though, have understood depth, though, you can see depth. For example, I don't look at things with two eyes at once. I look either with my left eye or with my right eye, and I don't have binocular vision. But I still see depth, because I understand it to be there, and as a result of understanding it to be there, I see it. If I understand clearly, I couldn't understand the nature of depth if I was just told, looking at things, that they have two dimensions. But if I make an exploration and I handle the thing, and I understand what a third dimension is, then I understand it more thoroughly. I'm quite clear about it. And then as a result of being clear about it, I see it. Now, in the same way, people did at one time actually see, believe it or not, the crystal spheres in which the planets were supported. We would say, how did they see it if it was transparent? Well, they saw it. They knew it was up there. And it was there for all to see, because naturally you can always see through crystal. It's clear. You see, people really think like that. And they see things if they're hypnotized into seeing them. Now then, if you take the suggestion away, then they won't see anymore. Or conversely, if you have the idea of a number system which is only 1, 2, 3 many, nobody can see four things. They will see something that other people call four, but they won't see four, they will just see many. And four will be as many as 5. They might begin then to have a concept of a little many and a big many, and a middle many. That's 3 again. They won't be able to get little many, not so little many, rather large many, very big many. You see, they won't be able to do that, so long as their number system is 1, 2, 3 many. So then it can never be a fact for such a person that a room has 4 corners. It has many corners, or else 3. But once you've got the idea of 4, then you can see that it has 4 corners. When I see the sun rising, I know that the sun isn't moving, but the earth is turning. One has traveled enough in aeroplanes to see that for oneself. And the question then now is this. If someone believes that the sun is rising and the earth is still, when he looks at the sunrise, is he seeing the same thing I'm seeing? I don't think he is. Because my seeing has an entirely different interpretation on it than his seeing. So, what you understand also determines what you see. So that's what's meant by a Jnana yoga in India, a method of awakening through intellectual mind, through intellectual understanding. People say you can't get it intellectually. That's partly true, but only partly true. That means, first of all, well, for example, the old Hindu saying that you cannot get wisdom through books is, as I explained, because it's a dialogue. But also it's because the books that exist are only notes. In other words, all the sacred books are nothing more than memoranda, just like the notation of Hindu music is only a memorandum. It's not something you follow. It's a reminder of a certain raga or theme, and then you play it and improvise on it. So in the same way, all the aphorisms in the Yoga Sutra or the verses of the Gita and so on, they're notes, little jottings, and then the teacher will explain them. So when something is understood very thoroughly by the thinking mind, it will eventually become a sensation, because you'll really understand it, you see? So that I'm saying all this as a basis for seeing that when Buddhism envisages the character and the consciousness of the highest form of man, which it calls bodhisattva, it is not somebody who's out of this world. It's not somebody who's in a state of some weird ecstasy, or somebody who sees everything kind of full of angels, as we might expect in the ordinary way, or anything like that. Real angels, gods, and so on, are very different from what you might suppose in the imagery. You can find out, for example, that the dust is full of gods. If you really look at dust, and that the pores of your skin contain many universes. And that's marvelous, you see. That's to see that things are full of gods, but you're still not seeing anything different from the ordinary things you see, but you've got a different understanding of it. So, having a different understanding, you're nevertheless the same world, same everyday life, same everything going on that everybody else has. The understanding, in other words, is not away from this everyday kind of experience we're having now. So there's the bodhisattva. And this is an extraordinarily important vision for the whole of Asia. Why? Because there was always a tendency in Asian spirituality to want to go away. That's very understandable, because when life is rough and there are terrible plagues and wars and hunger and diseases, a lot of people would think, oh, enough is enough is enough. And if this is going to go on and on, if we're going to be reincarnated back and back into this mess, isn't there some way of getting out? So in that way, you can lose all interest in everyday life. For example, supposing you are a drunk, a really serious, dedicated drunk, and lots of people are. They want out. And they couldn't care less whether they have no money, whether they're going to die, whether they're dead, just so long as they can stay out. Now, you might say, as we look at people like that, well, that's very sad. It's terrible. Look at, they're wasting their lives. But from their point of view, they're not. They're living the real out life they want to live. Or a person may be an opium addict, you see, and he'll be in his special paradise. And you say, well, isn't that terrible? Well, he wants out. And from his point of view, as he looks at it, it's perfectly all right, because he thinks the people who are pursuing those ends which are considered virtuous and practical, he thinks they're out of their minds. Why do all that? Why do you have to go on struggling and struggling and struggling to keep alive? What do you think that's going to give you? You see? So he feels it doesn't matter if it ends sooner or if it ends later. Time is an illusion. In his state of consciousness, he can make a tiny little bit of time into a long, long time. He can experience 100 years in an afternoon or longer. And some people think, you see, that you might have immortality through the fact that in the moment of your death, your sense of time gets longer and longer and longer and longer and longer and longer. So that although from the standpoint of an outside observer who is not in your state of consciousness, it looks as if you're having your head cut off in a hurry, from your standpoint, that lasts forever because of the alteration of your time rhythm. See how slippery philosophy can be. And so people can think all these things and they can get lost. And there was always a tendency in Oriental culture to do that. And from our point of view, that's a bad thing. Well, from, say, the Chinese point of view, also, it was a bad thing. The Chinese were very practical. And like, they believed in the family and in having children and husbands and wives and in industriousness and in building and in arts and in cultivating the soil by very ingenious methods. And so there was a special appeal to them in the idea of the bodhisattva. Bodhisattva, you see, he's not like the extremely contemplative private Buddha. You won't find a bodhisattva sitting all day under a tree in a state of rapt absorption, so that anybody who comes up and knocks on him won't get an answer. He'll be like everybody else, or he will look like everybody else, because he will see that this everyday world too is it. This nothing special world. Misty rain on Mount Lu, waves surging at Zhejiang. When you have not been there, no rest from the pain of longing. But you go there and come back. It was nothing special. Misty rain on Mount Lu, surging waves at Zhejiang. This isn't meant, you see, to debunk it and say, well, after all, sort of it was a nasty baby anyhow, it only died to spite us. It isn't it isn't a kind of thing, oh, it was nothing, like that. In the idea of nothing special, or buji, there is a way of saying but look at ordinariness. Look what you miss every moment. And you see that sort of attitude underlies tea ceremony, where a very great appreciation exists of the very simplest kinds of utensils, rooms, architecture, and so on. There was a very great sage who lived far off in the mountains behind Kyoto, and an American student had great desire to see him, and he made all sorts of inquiries to find this man. At last found the way to the hermitage, but then it was very difficult to get there. But he did finally find the old man out and came and said, how do you do? And they talked. And the old man was delighted that the foreign student should have taken all that trouble and should show such good understanding of these things that he served him tea ceremony with nothing but hot water. No tea, see. And the American student was delighted. He realized that this man had paid him a real compliment. So that's buji, you see, that's nothing special. Now then, generally speaking, as we look at the whole field of Buddhism, the idea of the bodhisattva, that is to say, the idea of realizing the enlightened state in terms of everyday life, is characteristic of the Mahayana school of the North Asia. Whereas the Theravada, or sometimes Hinayana school of South Asia, still has its emphasis on the idea of getting away. Still very much concentrates on the ideal of the monkish life, which is celibate and away from all everydayness, all attachment, all kinds of worldly responsibility. And so those monks in their yellow robes are very much a people apart. In the Mahayana, on the other hand, although there are monks, they aren't monks quite in the sense of the Southern school. I mean, it's like a Roman Catholic priest is not supposed to marry, but an Episcopalian priest may. So in that sense, the Southern monks are like Roman Catholic monks, and the Northern monks are like Anglican clergy, something like that, except that they have a rule that if they do live in a monastery, they mayn't take wives in there, and likewise the nuns mayn't have husbands in there. But if they live apart in a temple, a priest may have a wife, because they see no fundamental inconsistency between the state of deeply illuminated consciousness and living in some kind of affectionate human community and society. So, therefore, for that reason, through Mahayana, through the idea of the Bodhisattva, Buddhism was able to exercise an enormous influence upon the everyday life of the Far East, to express itself through art forms that were by no means stereotyped, not merely iconographic and stylized. Buddhism in the Far East expressed itself through naturalistic art forms. And so it's an extraordinary thing, but you see the religious painting of China, insofar as it is influenced by Zen Buddhism, very rarely has a religious subject. When you would say, what is Christian art? Well, you would recognize that certain great schools and styles, you would say, you would associate Romanesque architecture with Christianity, certainly Gothic architecture. You would associate early Italian painting, or a great deal of Russian painting, with Christianity, peculiarly. But Christian art, you see, always seems to have for its subject matter the Christ, the saints, the angels, the incidents in the lives of the saints, their martyrdoms, and so on and so forth.
Đêm buồn lặng lẽ, một mình tôi nhìn mưa rơi chợt thấy bồi hồi, thao thức đợi chờ người xưa đến. Có lẽ người ta chẳng đến rồi, ngậm ngùi nhìn cánh phượng vĩ rơi, ve ngân dạ khúc thất bùi ngùi. Hạ chưa kịp đi, thu vội tới. Từ nay ta đã mất nhau rồi, duyên hai ta đã hết rồi. Yeah. Đêm buồn lặng lẽ một mình tôi, nhìn mưa rơi chợt thấy bồi hồi, thao thức đợi chờ người xưa đến. Có lẽ người ta chẳng đến rồi, ngậm ngùi nhìn cánh phượng vĩ rơi, ve ngân dạ khúc thật bùi ngùi. Hà chưa kịp đi thu vội tới, từ nay ta đã mất nhau rồi, duyên hai ta đã hết rồi. Yeah. Đêm buồn lặng lẽ một mình tôi, nhìn mưa rơi chợt thấy bồi hồi, thao thức đợi chờ người xưa đến. Có lẽ người ta chẳng đến rồi, ngậm ngùi nhìn cánh phượng vĩ rơi, ve ngân dạ khúc thật bùi ngùi. Hà chưa kịp đi thu vội tới, từ nay ta đã mất nhau rồi, duyên hai ta đã hết rồi. Yeah.
To me talking, you may try to make sense of the words. But actually, in the sense of the words that I'm saying, isn't the content of what I'm trying to explain. The content of what I'm trying to explain can be heard in the sound of my voice. And in order to listen to that properly, you have to go beyond its meaning. For example, if you say the word yes, and then say it again, yes, 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 it becomes a very funny word. And you think, why did we use that funny noise, yes, to mean yes? Or you might see somebody sitting like this, you know. Say, imagine this is on a movie. The man just sitting there for a while, and then suddenly he goes, he shrugs his shoulders. That's a normal enough gesture. It might mean he was just puzzled. But as he's going on sitting there, he does. And you wonder, what's the matter? He's got a tick. Suddenly you see the gesture begins to lose meaning. It becomes somebody being... Well, that's you have to have big ears to get that, you see. So it's through that you know he hears all sounds as being just sounds. Of course he can hear meaning in them too when they have meaning, but fundamentally underlying the meaning, he hears just the sound. And this is something you get too if you go to a foreign country and you don't understand the language, and you see all the people talking. And you notice things that they don't notice about themselves because they get absorbed in the meaning of what they're saying. And so they don't notice the fascinating aspect of the perfectly meaningless side of their behavior. But at any rate, the whole approach of the whole result of the Bodhisattva doctrine in the art of the Far East is to create what Spiegelberg has called the religion of non-religion. where the religion became so perfect that it left no trace. It's like when you build a house, you erect scaffolding. When you finish, you take the scaffolding away. And you wonder, if you'd never seen a house being built, how on earth the builders got up so high. So in the same way, the ancient idea of Buddhism is that the Buddhism is a ferry boat. And it's designed to take you across the stream, from this shore, which is samsara, the rat race, to the other shore, which is nirvana. When you get on the other side, you get off the ferry, see? The ferry boat goes back to bring the next party over. But if you stay on the ferry boat, that means, you see, you're in love with the ferry boat. And you're in danger of becoming a religious maniac. And people do that, you see. You know how it is. You've probably had that experience. People who join a church and then become fascinated with all the things that go with church. They like Bibles, not just for what's in them, but the smell of the Bible, the appearance of the Bible, has something holy and numinous about it. And they like crucifixes. Now, a crucifix is a pretty grisly object, a corpse nailed on beams. But they get jeweled crucifixes, beautiful works of art, enameled, gorgeous things. And people with a great religious feeling love to finger those things, you see. And Buddhists, too, do that. They like their rosaries and their Buddha images and the smell of incense. And they get a kind of churchification. The French have a wonderful word for those goods. They call them bondieuserie. And it's a little difficult to translate. Literally, good goddery. But le bon Dieu, you know, everybody, some of this sentimental piece, oh, le bon Dieu. The old lady is always talking about le bon Dieu. And so people say, you know, people who've got church on the brain, le bon Dieu. So all these stores sell bondieuserie. Now, while this, you see, is in its own way understandable, the whole point is that in the supreme state of understanding, you get rid of bondieuserie altogether. That's the religion of no religion. See? You don't even have any beliefs. The whole creed, everything is utterly surpassed. That means you've left the ferry boat and you've gone on the other shore. You don't carry the ferry boat with you. And so this religion of no religion is very pure, very transparent. It's called like the salt in water, like the glue in color, or in ink. You see, a stick ink that the Chinese make has glue in it to hold it together, but you can't see the glue. It's all solid black all the way through, and the glue isn't observable. So the salt isn't observable in water. In this way, you see, religion is being used as a medicine and not as a diet. The Dharma is to use a Zen expression, it's like picking up a brick to knock at somebody's door. And when the door opens, you don't carry the brick into the house. So a person, you see, who has much religion has what is called in Zen a Zen stink. And that's considered rather bad, a rather specially bad smell. And one of the Zen poems says, to know your original mind, your essential nature, that is the great disease of our religion, of our school. See? So people who have this thing, who have Zen, and you can say, well, that fellow's a Buddhist, and he has this special thing he has, you know. It's like those of us who have the disadvantage of our eyes not being quite good, we have to wear spectacles. And that's a nuisance you carry around with you all over the place. Gadget you have to fix on you. And or people who belong like clergy to a religious order have to go around in funny clothes. You know, the rabbi who has a beautiful beard, but he will wear a beastly black Homburg hat which is so unnatural, you see. So they have this apparatus. In a way, they're like people with artificial legs, crutches, and so on. So it isn't something that's worked. It isn't working like a medicine. Because if a medicine works, you get rid of it. If the doctor is successful, he gets rid of his patients. And so in exactly this way, suchness is an attempt to say something which can't be said. It is trying to say the world that, just as it is, you see, that's what we're trying to show you to look at. We're not trying to drag in some fancy apparatus from above, some special system which has got to be imposed on you, all kinds of gods and complicated people you've got to believe in. We're not going to fill your brains with a lot of new stuff, but instead come to the clarity of seeing things just the way they are. But the trouble is, when somebody said to a Zen master, the lines of the hills and the clouds, are not all these the body of Buddha? He said, yes, but it's a pity to say so. And so even to have to say, look, that, see? It's just a little bit too much. Just a little bit too much. It would be more admirable if I didn't have to say anything, didn't have to point out a thing. But after all, one does have to make some concessions to folly. This morning, I was discussing various aspects of what might be called the religion of no religion, considering religion as a raft for crossing a river, or rather religion in the sense of dharma, not so much the doctrine as the method, considering it as the raft for crossing a river, as the brick for knocking at a door, as a medicine to cure a sickness, which when it's worked, you get rid of. And I was showing you that this in the Far East culminated in a type of life, a way of life, where to some very large extent the outward symptoms of religiousness disappear, especially in the art forms, where the icon ceases to be the figure of the holy person or the deity or whatever, and becomes simply a flowering branch, a rock, flowing water, clouds, birds, and funny little old men. You know, a curious thing goes on in the whole world of religious practice. And that is, the older a religion gets, the more the distance of time lends such eminence to its original founders that they become superhumanized. And the practice of the religion that they founded becomes sort of derived of power. It just sinks into going through the motions, because people say, well, we're living in a decadent age. In the past there were these great heroes who did all these marvelous things, Buddha and Jesus and Confucius and all their great followers. But today everybody is rotten, and nobody can expect to get more than a little way. I had a friend who went to India. He was an astonishing fellow because he was earnest. He would do anything. He was full of the power of self-discipline. And he put himself under an Indian master who came to this country in the first place. And he became a vegetarian, and he practiced yoga every day, and he was determined to get that thing. So finally his teacher told him the best place he could go to in India. And off he went, and he joined a yoga school. There was a whole faculty, and everybody was practicing yoga. And he was so earnest and he was so devoted that within 4 weeks he could do everything that the other students could do. And they had been there maybe 2 or 3 years. And so when he got to that, he mastered all the physical postures and the breathing exercises and the concentration exercises. And so he said to one of the older students, now, what about real samadhi? Do you get that around here? And the student said, no, none of us have got it yet. You better ask the teachers. So he began asking around the members of the faculty, what about samadhi? Do you get this? Well, they said, no, not yet. Well, he said, I'm willing, he said, to spend any amount of time here. I don't have to get back. I've got just enough funds to get by. And so I'm willing to do anything you tell me, to practice with all my heart. Can you, do any of you have samadhi? They said, well, no, not yet. Does anybody? Can you direct me to someone who does have it? Well, I said about 125 years ago there was someone who was really considered to have had it. And so then he began to think, why is it then that when the members of the faculty come out of their meditation period, they all look as if they'd just had a good sleep? You see? There begins to always grow up the concept of a golden age. Our forefathers, they really knew how to do it. But today, everything's falling apart. Do you know, people have been saying that for centuries. There is an Egyptian text on the panels of some pyramid, temple or whatnot, 6,000 years old, in which an Egyptian priest is complaining that everybody's falling apart. So, the lesson of this is, everybody here has just as much capacity as Buddha had. Nobody, who was Buddha's teacher? Think about that. Who psychoanalyzed Freud? Somebody has to start. And so everybody has the potentiality of being the first one. So I call this problem the distance of excessive reverence. It has the disadvantage, you see, of making all these problems that we're discussing and states of consciousness that I've been talking about, it makes them seem impossibly remote, as if they were something attainable only by a very, very favored few. And that's a very frustrating attitude to get. We were discussing this morning the sense that people have when they read Zen literature, that the thing is just round the corner. I just almost was on it. See, that's much more healthy attitude than that, oh, this thing will require many, many years of practice. Now, it so often turns out, you know, that the person who feels that it's just round the corner will feel this way for many years. Only, he won't be put off by the idea of many, many years' work yet to do, but will always, in the feeling that it's always almost instantly available, his interest will be maintained for an extraordinarily long time. Thinking of how much work there is to be done just puts some people out of commission. You know, you've got to answer a lot of letters, and they've stacked up and stacked up and stacked up. It's an appalling pile. And eventually everything gets so complicated that you're inclined to take the whole bunch of correspondence and throw it in the fire. But if you have to answer it, for some reason or other, you can only answer it one letter at a time. Same way with washing dishes. When they pile up on the drying board, and you get this mountain of dishes, and you think, oh, I've got to go through that. I've done it before, I've got to do it again this afternoon, and for year in and year out I can see all those dishes I've got to wash in the future, and lo and behold, the pile of dishes on the draining board grows higher and higher in your mind's eye until it's absolutely overwhelming. And you say, well, maybe some super dishwasher, some kitchen maid of the past who was a great hero would undertake this sort of life. But poor little me, I can't do that sort of thing. Whereas the only way to wash them is one by one, as if each one was the only one you had to wash. That's obvious. So don't be discouraged by this attitude that you find so commonly among Asian peoples in their feeling about Buddhism and Hinduism, that it's something so great that it's only cut out for very few supermen. Don't let that put you off. It may be true statistically. When you review the vast, vast multitude of human beings that there are, but so likewise, from a statistical point of view, this group of you gathered here, and maybe some comparable groups dotted around the country in various places, constitute a tiny, tiny fragment of the total population. And I suppose some external observer could say, of you, rare, rare indeed are the people who are interested enough in all this to give it, a weekend's thought even. But from your own subjective standpoint, you're not a statistic. You're not one of a special elect few, such that you've joined a secret society and have become self-conscious about it. You may be, from a certain point of view, one of an elect few, but from your own point of view, you're just your own direct, perfectly straightforward self, with no particular claims to fame or whatever it may be. So don't be put off by the distance of excessive reverence when it comes to all these things. Well, now, I want to take a further step in getting across the idea of thusness. I made already some mention of looking at words as if they were things that had no meaning, but were just noises, but interesting noises, just as the shape of a leaf is an interesting shape. Now, consider first of all the shape of a leaf. It's something that goes like this, you see. And it's green, and it floats on a tree. And it is a method whereby the tree absorbs moisture. And there are all sorts of people who will want to say to you, you see, really a leaf is a very rational thing. It exists so that the tree can absorb moisture, and they can go on describing it, and you see all the wonderful ways in which this little leaf works as a kind of a moisture-absorbing, breathing thing. And you say, yes, by Jove, isn't that great? That's very rational. Marvelous thing a tree is. And yet when you consider that the object of the leaf is to absorb certain things that are necessary for the maintenance of the tree, then you must ask the next question, look at the tree as a whole, standing there, bushy and bright, and you say, well, what's that for? Well, I mean, what purpose is served by the tree? Well, people say it has something to do with the oxygen in the atmosphere. And if there aren't any trees around, you see, human beings and animals, higher animals, can't live. They need trees and they need plants. So, taking it back again, the shape of the leaf then is interpreted as having something to do with the maintenance of me. Well, naturally then that's very important. It serves a function. It's a good leaf, see? But then let's ask a few deeper questions. We looked at the tree and said, well, you're an entertaining and funny shape. What are you for? And it said, well, I serve mankind. All right, now let's look at a human being and say, you're a funny shape sitting around here. What on earth do you think you're doing? I mean, you're surviving, you're eating things up. But what for? And then you really have to think. Oh, yes, I remember now, you say. I'm for the boss. There's a system going on. And we all, the lower things serve the higher things. And there's something higher than us. There are angels above us, and then above all the angels there's God. And we serve God. Oh. And that's the meaning of human life, to serve God. All right? Now, what's God for? See? There he is, sitting up in heaven. However you want to interpret God, whether you want to interpret God in a primitive way, as an old gentleman, kindly disposed, very powerful, clothed in the skies, upon the golden throne, surrounded by all the angels, playing those harps I told you about. You know, the angel's harp is the entire spectrum of physical possibilities. You know, from cosmic rays to hard X-rays on the other end, or whatever it is. I'm not a physicist. But that's the harp of the angel, and the Lord God, clothed with the skies, there they all are sitting in heaven. And they're looking at him and saying, well, Lord, you're the most beautiful thing we ever saw. You're the answer. But why? See, what's he for? Well, they agreed. They sat around there for a long time, and they said, really, Lord, we look at you and we decided you aren't for anything. You don't need to be. You don't serve any purpose because you're it. You're there. You've arrived. See? So what do you do when you're there? What does the Lord do, you see? I mean, I think you'll understand my figurative language. Well, he glows. And everybody sits around that glow and they say, hallelujah, 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 holy, 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 Lord God of hosts, heaven and earth are full of thy glory, thy Shekinah, thy jazz. That's what it's all about. Now, you see, you can derive a lot of things from that. You can say, look everybody, as if this were God talking, look everybody, I have this big thing going, and I want you to share it. But there are conditions. In order to share it, you must love me. But you can't love me unless I give you the capacity to do so. But if I give you the capacity to love me, you get at the same time the capacity to hate me, or to love yourself instead. So from that, you see, we set up a whole pattern of game rules in which you think, like this, oh dear me, you know, I ought to get that thing, that love of God. That's terribly serious. I ought to get that, because if I don't get that, I haven't made it. I haven't got the purpose of the whole creation. And that's terribly difficult to do. But what then when you get it? What then? Suddenly the whole thing changes. And it's no longer this awful kind of thing, will I or won't I? Am I good or am I guilty? Am I saint or am I sinner? Then suddenly, at the end of it all, the Christian sees that what he was being invited to was a party in heaven where they could all sit around and go like this, because that's great, you see, the vibrations. They do it forever. Just like children like to throw stones into a pond and watch the waves go out. Or like birds will sit all through twilight and sing and sing and sing, no hurry, repeating the same themes, sometimes with subtle little variations and so on. They just sit and they sing. So you see, always, when you get down to the bottom of anything, and you say, what's that for? What's that for? You're finally going to get to a point where somebody says, well, I just like to make a noise. I can't explain it, it has no purpose, but I saved my money for years. I bought an insurance policy. I did everything purposefully just so that I could finally sit down and make this noise. Oh, I mean, you may like to smoke cigars, sit in a rocker on the porch, and smell the smell of that smoke. See? You may think that that's very decadent and that you ought to be working for others, that you ought to be raising funds so that there shouldn't be anybody underprivileged. And when you've raised the funds and you've given all that money away to the poor, what are the poor going to do? They've got to find some other poor. They're going to give that, they're going to work for. But then when they've worked for those, and they're all right, and everybody's all right, what are they going to do? Why, they're going to sit on the porch and they smoke a big cigar. Now this has become a serious problem, because it's highly possible that we're entering into an age of automation in which it's not going to be necessary to work. Except, I mean, if you want gravy, it's going to be, yes. But if you want simply to have the basic necessities for survival, the advanced food and medicine and so on that a technological society can produce, you won't have to do a thing. We will move into an age when all that will be, practically speaking, for free, because the machines will earn the money for us, and we'll get paid for it. And people will say, well, now, a human being, well, we've always felt before, you don't have any right to live unless you're productive. You must work, you must produce something. That's why it's always been difficult for a literary man. If you're a farmer, then you know you're serving the community. If you're a fisherman, even if you're a grocer, you know you're doing something useful. But if you're a poet, you begin to get a guilty conscience. Shouldn't I have been a farmer? So on. But so always, though, when you follow it through, when the farmer gets the milk to the baby drinks the milk, goes blah, 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 absorbs this milk, and gets bigger. Finally it comes to be a man. The man does all these things, he gets all this food and he sends it around, and he makes more people, and he feeds them all, and they say, thank you so much for feeding us, we're doing well. But he may say, well, so what? What's it all about? I mean, it looks as if I've sometimes suggested that all we are is an elaborate system of tubes. And the object of these tubes is to put things in at one end and let them out at the other, and enjoy that. Enjoy it so much that you like other tubes, and you make connections with those tubes in such a way that you get more tubes. Now these tubes have ganglia at each end, at the top end, called a brain. And the point of that ganglion is to be a very sensitive, cunning little thing that finds out where there are things to eat. So they keep reproducing each other, and so the whole of life becomes the flow of a stuff through a tube. Get that through and get it going faster. Get more of it going through. Get more of it. And don't let it foul the things up as it goes through. Everything as it goes through a tube tends to wear the tube out. So the tube tries not to be worn out by the stuff going through it, so as to keep the sensation going on. Now the tubes, when they are through with eating, and they're satisfied in that way, they are going to play other games, just to keep things interesting. And so slowly they invent civilization, and they invent literature and music and painting, and they do all this thing, you see, because when you go off to the evening, you've done your day's work, you've eaten your dinner, I hope not out of too much of a sense of duty. Well, then what? Well, there are so many things you can do. You can go to the concert, where they will make all kinds of complicated noises. And you'll say, my, listen to that, you know? So that you'll be able to get that feeling of being astounded. What fantastically complicated noises are made here. Or you go dancing. And when you go dancing, you see, you go chitter, 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 all over the room. See? Jiggle, 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 jiggle. Complicated jiggle, see? Even beautiful jiggle, but basically jiggle. And that's what that led up to. So you see, the more you think about it, about what all this work is for, why we are campaigning for this and for that, to get world peace, to get recognition for Negroes, to get this, that, and the other, what do we all want everybody to do? And so when the Negroes get their recognition, then what are they going to do? Well, they're going to gather together, and they're going to go, hooja dooja dooja boo ba hoo dum boo, and do all sorts of things like that, because that's great. But you must see, therefore, the whole world as that sort of a thing ultimately. When you finally get down to it, it likes to make noises, it likes to blow bubbles, it likes to dance in a ring, and that's what it's all about.